Good afternoon, everybody. We are going to do a focus group on water and the environment. And so we've got a lot of really smart folks on the line, both attending and from the consultant side. So thanks for taking this hour here in the afternoon. I think you're going to learn a lot about some of the challenges that we're dealing with to make sure that we get the water component of this right, and how that works with the environment component as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric and all the smart people, and they're going to tell you more about the project.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the goal here is to kind of solicit feedback, talk about the more technical issues on the project, and engage with you, have good discussion, and see what range of solutions is acceptable to fit within the broader scheme of the project here. So we're going to dive on in, introduce the team real quick. This is just the sub-consultant team. I'm Eric Shelton, design lead on the project, but focusing primarily on flood control. And Chris, you can go ahead.
Yeah, Chris Olson with Right Water Engineers. I'll be assisting with some of the water quality aspects of this project in terms of stormwater treatment, and then also partially in the stream. So.
And I'm Jonathan Pollock with Habitat Architect, and we're excited to work on this with everybody. I am an environmental engineer, and we're going to be helping with the ecological components, kind of as it's related to the 319 grant funding and the kind of the recreation of the open channel with a riparian zone. And then we'll probably have a little chance to do a little overlap work with Chris and Eric on the water quality aspects right there with the in-stream kind of facilitation.
So the goal for today is to focus on water and the environment, like we said. So kind of the layout for this session is I will go over a quick refresh of some of the basics. I don't intend to go over all of the information that we did in the 10-minute pre-work video or in the visioning session, but just to provide some context for the site. And then we have a series of discussion questions, 5 questions that we're hoping to spend on average 10 minutes each, 2 focusing on flood control, 2 focusing on water quality, and then 1 focusing on water as an amenity for the site. Next slide. So first, just looking at the existing condition and in the flooding condition, and you can play that video. This is located at Main Avenue, just a video of Jordan Creek and its flood stage. And I show this just to provide context for the velocity of flow that we have to deal with, the flow rate and the volume that we have to deal with on this site in a flooding condition. What we're seeing here is probably a 2 to 5 year event. The box culvert itself can convey about 2,200 CFS. So when we talk about CFS on this project, that kind of gives you a perspective for what that is. Next slide, please.
Eric, where are we looking at when we look at that?
That's at Main Avenue, looking east at the downstream end of the box culvert.
Okay.
And this here is, you can play this as well. This is just downstream of that, kind of on the north side of that channel on Main Avenue. I mean, and the point here is just to show this is in its flood condition, this is a raging, roaring river with, high velocities. This is probably the worst spot as well because, we're confined within the channel. It's all concrete line. There's nothing to slow it down. But, when we open up the channel in our site, in the worst flood conditions, we're able to mitigate it a little bit, but we will have these high velocity conditions. So next slide, please. So in our 2D modeling that we've done on the existing condition, we've just evaluated what those velocities look like. And as I said, you can see in the channel there west of Main in the bottom left there where it's dark red, those are the worst conditions. In the existing condition where it's shallower throughout the city, in this 100-year flood condition that's shown, you can see there are other places where velocities speed up as it's confined through in constrictions between buildings and in parking lot and street areas where it's mostly pavement. Next slide, please. So then contrast that with the normal condition. These pictures are representative of, normal condition in the summer when there hasn't been a lot of rain recently. These are also at these are at the Main Avenue Bridge, the triangular channel. You see the flow flowing into the camera toward us. I will say about this, we've done a lot of, or we've, tried a lot to kind of downplay the amount of water here because it is what it is. And there's only so much that you can do with the actual amount of flow that we have here. But I will say that every time I've been out here, there is always water. I've never seen it dry, even in the hottest months of the year. There is a consistent base flow. So with that, there is opportunities for us to create pools, create riffles, do things similar to what we have in natural Jordan Creek, where it's daylighted and it's in natural condition downstream of Grant and, through the rest of Jordan Creek. Next slide, please. So this is just a comparison of those two conditions at Main Avenue, and really trying to emphasize that the project that we are designing, the space that we're designing, has to accommodate both of these conditions. And it has to work well in both of these conditions. Next slide. And then here are just a couple of videos that I've taken in the last month or two. The one on the right is from Monday, and this is kind of the in-between condition. So we've shown, the low normal summer condition and then the high flooding condition, but these videos are what you might expect 3-4 days after a rainfall event. The one on the right was Monday. I think we had some rain last Thursday, and that base flow will tend to hang around for a little while and kind of create a good environment with a good amount of flow through there. Next slide. Next slide, Taylor. Thank you. So then when we did conceptual hydraulics here, we were able to identify the amount of conveyance that we need in order to achieve the flood control goals for the project. And I've included this schematic from that study, which was 6 years ago at this point, but really just to provide context in what kind of area, what kind of volume is needed to convey that. So this would be, kind of like that section between Campbell and Boonville. You see the railroad tracks on the right and the box culvert on the left. And again, just to provide context of what that cross-sectional area might look like. Other than that, we're obviously not married to anything in this schematic here. The existing box culvert conveys 2,200 CFS, which is be similar to what we saw in that first exhibit that it was spitting out. That was probably a little bit less than its full capacity. And then the combined system, we're hoping to not quite double the capacity, but 3,600 CFS would be the proposed capacity with both the channel and the box culvert if and where it might remain. Next slide, please. So then quickly on water quality, the existing issues with water quality include trash. You can see in the picture on the right, trash and debris located in the culvert. Downstream, where it's daylighted and natural, there's plastic bags, plastic cups, bottles, normal debris and trash that you'd see in an urban stream environment. As far as contaminants, there's polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons that are known to be within the stream sediment, and other contaminants that are common in urban environments. And then lastly, just the lack of habitat associated with the concrete bottom through the channel and or through the box culvert and in the channel downstream of the box culvert. Next slide. So then finally, before we get into discussion, I wanted to point out just some of the things that came up during the visioning session and some competing interests that I think impact water quality. The first one being the, I guess it was brought up, the desire to have this well-kept look, this well-maintained look on the project, but it's also a desire to have low maintenance. things that require low maintenance. And so when we select water quality treatment measures, I think this comes into play with the types of BMPs and the types of treatment measures that we select. So we need to think about that and discuss that a little bit today. Then riparian benefits associated with restoring the stream bed and the stream bank. And I guess the contrast with being able to access the stream with that riparian corridor there and limiting access. And also that contrast with the urban feel within, the downtown Springfield setting that it's located in. And then finally, water quality treatment BMPs and the space they take up versus kind of the opportunity costs of utilizing that space for whatever else we want to do on the site and whatever other competing goals that we have. So with that, that's kind of the overview. We're going to dive into discussion. Like I said, we're going to start with 2 questions, one at a time, obviously, on flood control. And then we'll also hit on water quality, and we'll also hit on the base flow and using the water as amenity. So yeah, so first question, and we'll kind of, I'll read the question and then talk about how we're going to go through this. First question, what will success look like in terms of balancing the required flood control for the project with the other uses and vision for the space? So we'll probably follow the same approach that we've been doing in the other sessions where you can raise your hand. We don't have quite as many people today, so that may not be as necessary, but then if you want to use the chat, you can definitely utilize that as well too. And again, we kind of plan for 10 minutes here per question. If we don't, that's on average. We can use that time later if we don't quite need that for any given question. So.
And the plan is for most of the flooding to actually go through the existing blocks long term, right? The flood volumes.
I mean, I don't know that we have settled on any plan.
Okay. I was
I
wondering.
think the general or one idea is that they would remain and they would kind of share capacity with, like in that cross section that we looked at.
Yeah.
They kind of both work during flood events.
Okay.
Sarah, I think what you'll see at 5 o'clock tonight is a bunch of different approaches. What happens if the boxes are there? What happens if they stay in place and aren't utilized? What if they are utilized? What if part of them are removed? And so what we're exploring right now is what is that interaction between what the water needs and what the people needs, and how do we sort of put those 2 pieces together? So
Yeah, I was just, what I was getting at was like, I guess when you look at that picture of the high flow and the flooding, it definitely limits the other uses and access if you're going to be really removing most of that hardscape. So anyway, I'll look forward to seeing some of those combinations later today. That'd be great.
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of what we're trying to convey as well, and think there's a lot of competing interest for space on the site. So
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think even the way it's worded, it uses the word balance or balancing, and I think that's what this is going to be is a balance. We have a goal to try to get the flood levels down below the finished floors of the buildings in the area, but we also don't want to design something that's not going to be able to also accommodate the other goals for the project, including the other uses and elements that people want to see in the site. And so I think that's going to have to be considered, but And this morning, Eric Landerman, I think that was his name,
Yeah.
talked about some of those redevelopment or those catalyst sites. And many of them were right along this corridor. And so maybe as those redevelop, maybe as part of that, they get elevated. I don't know if those sites would be complete demoed and redeveloped or just using the existing structure that's there. But, maybe it makes sense to floodproof those in lieu of trying to get at some point, it's just not going to be feasible to get the water surface any lower than some level. And so, I think it's just going to be a balancing act to try to accommodate all the uses, but still try to get the flood level down as best we can.
I think that's a really good point, Chris. I mean, the balance of taking buildings and finished floor elevations out of, say, the 100-year floodplain can differ from our goal of, like you said, managing 25-year storm in a combination with existing open system or anywhere the box may be being maintained long term. I mean, those are two different goals, right? And trying to best achieve the adjacent development removal in coordination with how we're going to develop this open user space. Maybe we'll come up with a nice balance between, this 25 years we can manage over here. But in order to get these buildings out, like you said, maybe a catalyst site does have to be elevated, or our recommendations might lend to that way. Or, hey, this block is good, but as soon as we get downstream, we're going to have to look at alternatives. So.
One of the things that I would like to hear a little bit about is this idea that this is part of an overall strategy. This isn't the only strategy, or this isn't the only piece, but it's one of many other pieces throughout the entire Jordan Valley. And so my concern as a designer, right, and master planner is that we use our piece of the strategy, but that this site, because of its prominence, because of the sort of interest in it being a public space as well, that it doesn't have to do all the heavy lifting for the other things, because what will be left is a spot big enough for a bench. And so I think we need to keep that in mind, but I think it's important to talk about that bigger strategy here, and this is a component of it. Eric, I don't know if you want to address that, or the rest of the team, or certainly Chris could help us with that as well.
I want to throw something out that we had an internal brief discussion about the other day, was the idea of vertical structures, and the idea of if we've got these known flood conditions down in there, how is the city, what was the city's take going to be on the placement of vertical structures within a certain reach as we look at development and use options in here?
And when you say vertical structure, are you talking about like redevelopment, like buildings within the kind of still within the floodplain, I guess? Is that?
I think more along the lines of pavilions and pole type structures, things like that would become open space uses, but they require a canopy structure of some sort. I think the buildings, we would want to stay in line with city code, right? And not look at opportunities for that within flood prone area per se. But I'm thinking more open structure.
Yeah, no, I think we understand that that's probably going to be part of the, some of the elements in this area. So, I think Eric will have to account for those in the modeling, but yeah, I think I don't see an issue with that. And just to go back to Ken's point about, this area not having to do all the heavy lifting, and that's certainly true. We've got the 5 regional detention basins that were identified in Jordan Creek in the watershed upstream. We've built one of those. The second one is already designed, and we're working on acquiring easements and hopefully building that starting next, probably towards the end of next year. But we still got 3 more to go. And there has been some talk about even trying to, and it's probably a longer term dream, but retrofit, basically configure those outlets to have some sort of dynamic outlet that you could open and close gates or whatever it is, to where you can basically the outlet is a variable discharge, to where you could try to optimize it to limit the flooding in this area to the best that we could. And so yeah, absolutely, this area is not going to have to, you know, carry all that flood mitigation burden. But and not only with, but also we've not even talked about it, but the Main Avenue Bridge, you know, with this first section here, we do have a downstream constraint with the Main Avenue Bridge, and we're only really only looking at, you know, obviously we'll design it for the full what it needs to be, but you know, it's already really been designed because that bridge is structurally deficient and so needs to be replaced. And so we've designed it as a sort of half the size it needs to be, and then to be expanded in the future. And so really this first phase in terms of flood relief is not going to accommodate kind of the full benefits that we're looking for.
Not yet, right?
Yeah, that's you know, that's just another piece of the puzzle that's going to have to come later when we do future phases, would be to do the upstream portion, the rest of the detention basins, that Main Avenue Bridge.
Yep. Yeah, the one thing that I would add about this site not having to carry the entire burden is a lot of the buildings that do flood are located in this part of the total project length. And in order to as far as profile goes, we do have to kind of maintain a low profile, and that's kind of set in order to stay low enough to achieve our upstream goals. So in some ways, you know, being the downstream part, we have to provide a profile that allows us to accommodate the goals upstream. As you know, the cross section that we looked at there a while ago from the concept study, I think the concern with that is just how little of the site it leaves remaining. So trying to identify ways to have balance, I think, is extremely important. So like Ken said, we don't end up with no site left to do anything cool and do anything fun like everyone wants to do. So. So the next question is flood control. So
can I throw in something real quick, Eric?
Yeah.
From an economic development perspective, you know, you talk about balancing that, and I think we've hit on that. And I wanted to echo some of the comments that others have made, and Chris too, about trying to get development sites ready to go around this area. So, you know, as much as we can do to handle the flood flows, to make sure that some of these sites that have been identified, that right now the biggest challenge is that they are in the floodplain. If we can get them out and make, you know, one less burden developing on this park space here, we create more development amenities. And you know, I mean, otherwise, let's just go through and do a public works project, build another box, you know, and just keep it covered over, right? As a community, we can create park space. A lot of places where it'd be a lot easier to do that. But I think the idea is that we create park space that development wants to be a part of, and really create some unique spaces for our community here.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm going to jump in real quick too there, Eric, because I think that's one of the things that I think even Ken was kind of hitting on a little bit was, and what you just talked about was the expectations of, you're going to spend a lot of money on these 2 blocks that we're looking at right now, or, you know, going from Boonville to Maine. And are people expecting or anticipating that will solve the problems of that flooding? And so I think that would need to be something that's, you know, stated pretty strongly and pretty often through here, or whatever, that people understand that, to see if that would be the first approach here. if that's acceptable to, as the end result of this project, that you still do it. There's still issues.
Go. So yeah, the second question here is still going to be on flood control. So any thoughts that you had remaining can carry over to this session. But talking about concerns with this space, sharing this periodic flooding that we're showing in these videos. What are your concerns with periodic flooding within the limits of the project?
And I can tell you my main concern on that one. And Jonathan, Chris, you guys please weigh in here, but how do we make a riparian corridor that's somewhat sustainable and stays in place when this thing comes through? And you see that image that you saw in the very beginning with Eric's video, where that's only half the flow.
Yeah, I'm not a stormwater engineer here, so I'd love to hear from those guys as well. But I can tell you when I hear talk about movable furniture and all this kind of stuff, I'm like, well, that's all downstream. We'll go fish that out of Ewing Park a little bit later.
So you want heavy movable furniture is what you're saying.
Well,
Yeah,
I think
I think from a design element standpoint, I think it's critical that the design team understands there's a high likelihood that everything we design in the open space, the public space, is going to be inundated at some point. And so I joked yesterday with the team that, we need to put a power washing kiosk out there so that when people come, they can power wash things that are dirty. But it will happen. There's no doubt. And so we need to design that in. We need to understand from plant selection to hardscape selection to loose material selection, any of that stuff. We just have to be aware that is a reality of this site, and we need to manage that as a part of sustainability for it as well.
And ultimately, I mean, what I hope will happen with the design would be, we have some tiers with the flood levels, and in the base tier we have your normal flows from just common storms that you might expect, and then we have it elevates a little bit, and you have something that'll carry maybe a 5-year event like we showed in that video, and then you have another tier that creates the next storm. And then what that allows you to do is with each tier where you kind of have a shelf, you have a little bit lower velocities. So hopefully, within those, we'll be able to kind of manage those velocities a little bit, or at least understand what they are and plan accordingly.
Yeah, and to piggyback on what Eric was saying, I mean, Jared, you kind of jumped off with the idea of the riparian and how's this going to hold together when we got velocities like that. But I mean, the whole concept of recreating a natural channel system through there, I mean, we'll have to use a little engineered method, right, for early establishment, if you will. I mean, we'll have to recognize we've got young plants that aren't rooted yet. And so we will have to utilize what I'll call a little bit of hardscaping to try to maintain those TOA banks and maybe bed area a little bit. But, riparian zones in and of themselves, upon establishment, that vegetation is going to hold up and it'll withstand the velocities that are passing over it. So, I mean, as we design this, we're going to be looking for those, hard-rooted, hard-woody species, as well as kind of a low-growth section that will let the flows pass through it and kind of lay down with the velocities as they pass through. So it's kind of in selection of materials, if you will, that creates that balance between, it isn't like we're going to plant a row of trees and none of the trees will have any roots. So the first storm comes through and it just wipes them all out. I mean, we'll have to create a balance between more of an understory growth versus overstory growth. And but I think the realistic is there will have to be some engineering methods or hardscape to keep that in place. So as far as benches go, I'll let somebody speak to that has more of the park side development on that. So lots of bolts and keyed in maybe. So.
there any comments in the chat?
Sarah's got one.
As the new channel is created, it'll be interesting to see if there's a bedrock substrate that could be featured like some of the Pinnacle rock further downstream in Jordan Creek.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what's down there. We'll find out.
I see. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good point.
Because
If we
it might
have-
be nice, like, I mean, I see a lot of that, like with the South Creek channel, it's the moving gravel, the moving rock, the moving soil that has kind of been a challenge. But depending on what you find there as you kind of start the work, there might be some features that could be worked with anyway. But anyway, just a thought.
Good thought. Okay, so we'll go to question 3. This is moving on from flood control. Do you believe the project can be successful with the natural base flow rate? Why or why not?
Hey, Eric. Oh, sorry. I was just gonna ask, when you say the base flow rate, you mean just keeping it as a constant 1 cubic foot per second as it is now, as just that's what it is. Is that a correct understanding?
Right. Yeah. Like, yep.
Okay.
This is really just a comment. Something I've been wondering about is if there's more base flow down there than really we think there is, or that we can see. Once that concrete's gone, we might have a little bit more to work with than we think we do. So.
Well, I was thinking the same thing because there's always more flow downstream of the main bridge than there is in the channel every time I'm down there. So it makes sense that there would be flow underneath too.
I know on the Idea Commons site that I guess the groundwater table is pretty close to the bottom of the box. So I mean, I can see how we could get some of that groundwater starting to come in.
I think maybe one thing to spur the conversation a little bit too would be is, let's just say we've got 1 or even 3 CFS, which is, let's just kind of take the picture that Eric was showing earlier, right? And we can disperse that flow out over pooling and riffling runs, but we'll call it a very lazy flow, right? You can see it moving if you stand and look at it. If you want to take a picture of it, you wouldn't know it was moving, kind of a thing. Versus the idea of, for lack of a better term, augmenting the flow a little bit, whether that's using rooftop capture in cisterns or using a recirculation from downstream to upstream to capture water, where you actually then can create what I'll call more of a flowing channel, right? And so I think maybe that question, as it's posed, is the lazy movement an acceptable outcome, or do people want to see something with a little more flowing movement to it?
So what you're saying is a whitewater park is out of the picture here? If that's the case, I'm done.
That would be the recirculating model, yes. With really big cisterns, yeah.
So as the non-hydrologist on the call here, I do listen to the hydrologists a lot when they speak. So I've been at the school of Chris Dunaway for a while now. But just in talking to the community members that are excited about this project, when you start talking about, like, hey, in late August, the flow gets pretty low, how do you handle that? I think it's one of those things that they don't have any idea how the hydrology all works, but they want to see something, and the more times than not, they have pointed to the Brush Creek area in Kansas City as not a successful model. That Brush Creek, I think, has very similar flow, right? It can rip through there in storm events, but otherwise it's just a trickle. And they impounded all that water, and it just kind of looks like crap because it's just sitting there, and nothing has happened on it. All the development has happened in that area, kind of turning its back to Brush Creek more or less, or trying to get over it. So, I just from the general, business community or community leader perspective who are unfamiliar with the details of the engineering that's required, I think just being able to see something, pooling and rippling, some sort of action to the water is kind of what they're looking for. I think everybody realizes this is not a Colorado mountain stream, that's going to have this, rushing feel over the rocks. But, I don't think people would be too opposed to recirculation. I mean, hell, it works for Dogwood Canyon, right? People still go down there like crazy. Oh, wait, are we supposed to talk about that? Is it?
Well, so I think, Ryan, to your point, like with Brush Creek up here, right? For those that have seen it, or few of us that live up in the area, so the base channel of Brush Creek in and of itself is very wide. And so you get to those much drier periods. And what happens is you end up with, now it has a lot of rock shelving because it's in bedrock, but because of this wide base, that water gets very narrow in the center until you get to the pooling sections that you've talked about, which are kind of start at the plaza and work their way east. And the idea was when they did those pools that it was kind of an intention that development would come to be around it. So the pooling does stay full, but in making the pooling, you've then detracted from what otherwise would have been a stream flow type situation. So you've got two competing things. Upstream of the plaza, you've got a very wide, like I think in your case, the idea what we'd want to try to do is try to maintain a more narrow channel base to create that continuous water movement from upstream to downstream. And I'm not saying not pooling, because we definitely want to work pooling and riffling into the system, but not the kind of pooling like Brush Creek has. I mean, that's more like ponding, right? And we also don't have the kind of relief that we can get through that system either. The intention behind Brush Creek was very good at the time. I mean, the idea was well-founded. I don't know that it has resulted the way it was intended, but those are the challenges we're working with here. But I see yours not trying to create a base channel so wide that we do end up with a very droutish looking end result.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in this area, we're used to small streams, and we've had great exposure to those in South Creek and Galloway Creek and some of those that are smaller that, will really slow their flow down during drier parts of the year. So I think what you're talking about is, small pooling, not big ponding, because those on Brush Creek, those work fantastic for catching trash. Wind blows it right in there and it doesn't go anywhere. So yeah, that we don't want to see that.
And I mean, I think it's been mentioned before that this isn't, this is a different type of project than South Creek, obviously also, but South Creek before it was restored was kind of like Brush Creek, very flat and shallow flow. And then, you see what we were able to do with that just kind of by restoring it to more of its native condition with pools and riffles. And so that would be kind of the scale of thing that you could do with an unaugmented flow. But any other comments on base flow?
Well, I just wanted to touch on, you kind of hit on it earlier with the picture you showed, kind of an in-between. And I think, that people need to understand that, yeah, there's going to be times where it's just the base flow, but there's a lot of times, and I wish we had more data. We tried to Trek had worked with MSU last year to install some flow monitoring devices in the box, and we were hoping to have about a year of data right now, but people that live inside the box had vandalized it, so we don't have any data now. But we were hoping to have some flow frequency data, because I think that would help people understand that, there is a lot of time where that hydrograph is rising or coming back down. And so after every rain event, you probably have 2 or 3 days of, a lot more water than just 1 CFS. And if you figure we get, I don't know, probably a 1/4 inch or more rain a week, or so, we get these constant little rain events that are going to help augment this base flow. That it's not going to be just all the time where you see this 1 CFS. I think that's going to be, you're going to see that occasionally, but it's also going to be a lot of times where you see 3 or 4 CFS.
Yeah, and Chris, that's a really good point, because there will be times that when it's in its ideal, like 3, 4 CFS, and we've had a rain event and there's a couple of days where it's just fantastic. That's where I think we want it to really show off. Obviously, it has to handle when it is a raging torrent, but at the same time, it also can't look like we're in Arizona and it's all dried up and not flowing and a little crusty when August hits. So good luck designing that, guys.
Well, yeah, and what I was trying to get across too is, like I said, I've never seen it dry. I think there's always water. It's just, how quickly is that water going to be moving? And I like Chris's point, because I've been out there for the last month trying to get a video of it when it's kind of more towards its normal condition, and kind of funny, like it never was. It's always had more flow than that over the last month every time I've tried to go out there and shoot a video. So I mean, in the spring season, you're gonna have a lot more water, and then in August maybe it's more like the first video that we showed in the normal conditions. So that's a good point.
A quick question, and maybe Carrie, I think you might know the answer to this. So under the 319, since macroinvertebrate is one of the monitoring elements that can be utilized, could we go back and Chris was talking about having a flow monitor. Could you establish a flow monitor as part of that review, almost comparing flow conditions and how that then relates to macroinvertebrate population within the channel? Could we somehow piggyback those two together and then would allow it to pick up the data? Because I mean, there's future phases down the line, and that might be good reporting to have available.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think that's something we could probably accomplish. And I'm actually wondering, so we have ORI, the Water Institute at MSU, does stream sampling for us, and I believe that we have some gauges on Jordan Creek. I just don't remember off the top of my head the exact locations and if they would be beneficial or exactly what we're after for that flow data for this creek, but I can look at that. But regardless, yeah, I think that's something that we could accomplish and would be really good data and part of that, telling that story about the habitat improvements and macroinvertebrates.
And with that, if there may be an opportunity to work with MSU again, because the infrastructure is already there. They've already extended electric, and all we have to do is hook up another continuous flow monitor in the box. I think probably the biggest downfall, the one that was there, obviously we wouldn't want to just spend money and install another $1,000 monitor that's just going to get demolished again by somebody. But probably the downfall of that device is it took a picture every, I don't know, 30 seconds or 60 seconds with a really bright flash. So it was people knew it was there. So obviously if you did it without the flash, it would probably be relatively inconspicuous and people wouldn't know about it. And so I don't know, that may be because it would be real simple, everything to hook up another one. So that may be an opportunity, because I know MSU is real excited about having continuous flow data for their some of their water resources classes, because then you've got a real application, you've got a creek essentially underneath their lab that they could monitor and use that data. But anyway, just an idea.
Okay. All right. So we're going to move on to question 4 now. We have about 15 minutes left and 2 questions remaining. We're going to talk about water quality. In terms of water quality, what will success look like on this project? And I'm going to say that another way. Just what do you think of when you think of good water quality on this project?
I think the riparian corridor is a key element, but definitely, balance is going to be important. It's going to need, I think really the riparian corridor aspect is a really great opportunity to showcase how native landscaping can look really good and be a great part of an urban amenity, but also serve that riparian corridor purpose. So it's gonna look different from South Creek, not as wild, more of a landscape, but still providing that ecological function.
Okay.
And with that, I think, I don't think our expectation, obviously, we're not going to solve the water quality problem in Jordan Creek with just this project. That's certainly not the expectation, but I think going along with Carrie's comments, I think it's going to take a variety of different measures. Probably there's 20 or 30 pipes or connections coming into this reach. And so I think disconnecting those and using different, approaches to help slow that water down, removing impervious surfaces, things like that, I think is going to go a long ways as well.
Yeah, and part of what we're driving at here too is just, people have different perceptions of what water quality is, and trying to understand and make sure that we are achieving good water quality from that perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that the things that Chris mentioned are going to be really important for addressing the PAHs, which are, parking lots and roads are sources for those. And so that disconnection and treatment is going to be really important. But also the macroinvertebrates, in terms of the 319 grant, I think that's a really important measure of success. And on South Creek, that has been a success story, and EPA has recognized that project as a success story, specifically for the improvement in the macroinvertebrate population. So I think that's part of what success would look like on this project too. But again, I think that could be done in a way that balances, that goal with, how it looks and functions as a amenity as well.
Yeah, I was just gonna say life in the creek would look like success. So any kind of life at all would be great, other than like the blind fish that currently live down there and the pale frogs and things like that I see.
Me, and it's maybe a little more abstract, but just an opportunity to show people that there is a creek downtown and actually get people down there and have them just increase their overall awareness. I think an opportunity for education, to me, that is water quality down the line, not directly in this project, I guess, but just being able to use this as a educational place.
That's a really good point. Thanks.
One of the elements up here, there's a site here in Kansas City, Kansas, actually, that has, it doesn't have anything to do with the creek, but it has to do with their stormwater BMPs that they use. And I sometimes you can overdo signage, right? But at this site, they did a really good job with, they put up a small placard at each BMP, and I thought it was very tastefully done. And in that they explained the benefit of that BMP for that specific purpose. It was just one of those ones, like, you knew they were there, but typically you walk around and you don't want to see a lot of signs necessarily. It just says something. But this one kind of went that extra step where it was, this is the BMP, this is what it's accomplishing. And Brent, you just made me think about that as you were talking about bringing people there and recognizing that they know there's a creek actually there, but what do these elements do that are helping feed that creek, and the education component of it. So just spurred that in my head.
Yeah, I think that's good. There's a really good story here. So there's really no reason not to tell it. And people will wonder, well, why did why was it buried? And then why did it, why did you want to daylight it? So I think it's important. I think it's a good point.
I think that to build on that interpretive nature of getting people to interact with what we're doing is, I think, a really important part of this whole thing, not just here, but all along the valley. And so as we think about the interpretive part of branding and signing and mapping and leading them along on a trail, adding QR codes so they can get more in-depth information if they want it, having a walking tour that's accessible on your phone so that you really just have to scan things and then you're told the whole story, how it all fits together. That's really important to just engaging better into this. It's not enough from a people standpoint to have a really well done restored creek, right? That's not enough for them when they think about, I'm going to go experience this. And that's just reality. I hate to say that's true, but if we can find a way to connect them to the hard work that everybody on this call is doing, then you've made a connection, and then that starts to become more valuable, and they start to value what was done even better. So I think the signage, the interpretive part of this, I think everybody's right on the money as an element of way to elevate this and the whole community throughout the whole project. So couldn't agree more.
Awesome. Okay, Taylor, last slide. How do maintenance requirements and stream accessibility impact decisions on water quality treatment? So this is again about balance, I believe, but from a water quality perspective with accessibility and maintenance.
I think it's important for the stream to be accessible. And so, that I think that's something that needs to be an important factor when designing that riparian corridor. We want people to be able to walk down to the water and, really access and connect with the water. So I think that's an important consideration. And there's been several comments about trash and how, that's going to be a big maintenance need that we'll just need to stay on top of. But I'm not sure really how that plays into decisions on water quality treatment. But
Terry, when you say accessing the water, does that mean in places, or does that mean along its length? What is your thought on that?
I think it could be in places. That's my initial thought on that.
Okay.
Maybe it wouldn't need to be along the whole stretch.
Okay.
Do we have concerns about people getting in the water?
Yeah.
I don't know how to say it other than that.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. I'm not sure how we balance that.
We may need to delineate viewing areas more than access areas. I don't know.
I think though that we kind of need to assume that if people want to step into the water, they're going to. And that should, most of the time that should be fine. Maybe that's part of education too, just, staying out of water immediately after storm events because bacteria levels are going to be higher, that kind of thing. It's always a balance. You don't want to scare people, but you want them to be, educated, I guess.
Just a general question, but Is the water quality in Jordan Creek any better or worse than the water quality in, say, like downstream of Sequoia Park?
I would say it's not that much different. In base flow conditions, yeah, it's not that much different. I mean, we do see higher, sediment and nutrient and bacteria loads probably in Jordan Creek during wet weather conditions than Galloway or some of our other streams, but yeah. So yeah, I mean, we probably have the same concern everywhere in any urban stream.
Okay.
Have necessarily numbers to back it, but I would think that Jordan Creek gets visually, it just portrays that it would have poor water quality due to the level of imperviousness and lack of any type of natural stream channel throughout most of it where the public can see it, as opposed to something like out at Galloway, which has kind of more of a wooded corridor. But I would guess, I mean, again, I don't have the numbers to back it, but I would think the water quality would be pretty similar throughout most of our urban streams. So that's kind of how I've always perceived Jordan Creek. Just looks the most urban out of any of our.
I'd be more concerned about the trash. That's what I think of with Jordan Creek. It's going to have a lot of rain.
And the reason I was bringing that up, and Carrie kind of alluded to it, was it's really just, I mean, I think we have the same issue on a lot of your urban creeks of people trying to access them. They're either going to get to it or they're not, whether or not they want to. So whether or not you give them a focal point of something to walk into, or it's a pinch point, if it's something along the length of it, they're going to get in the water if they want to get in the water.
It seems to me the question is, do you want to reward people for getting in the water, or do you want to penalize them for getting in the water? Do you want it to be a good experience, or do you want it to be a bad experience? And if it is a bad experience, how bad? To keep them from never doing it again, or to keep them from never coming down to the place again? And I'm thinking about kids, but you could also think about the unhoused. I've been quiet because I came late, but one of the would you mind going back, Eric, one or two? Yeah, go back to 4, please. In terms of, you ask what success will look like on this project. I've been thinking about what would success sound like on this project or smell like. One of the things when you talk about water quality, I don't want the water to stink. I want it to smell like nature somehow. That's why I really loved Sarah's answer, that I just wanted to support life. And then I thought, yeah, but what if it's my grandchild's life? Yeah, I want that too. But then what does it sound like? I want it to sound like water. I want it to sound like the different sounds that water makes, and that it's a full water experience in that way. That what are the things that a stream does? And so if you're gonna, and riparian corridor is an engineering term, I think, or a geological term. I'm not exactly sure what that means, and I'm not sure what everybody has in their head when they think of that. Are we talking about Dogwood Canyon? Is that what we're going to do, is build Dogwood Canyon? Totally reconstruct nature? And I'm asking because I want to know. Is that the idea?
By riparian corridor, I think we're just talking about plants immediately adjacent to the stream that'll help filter as we get back to the channel is what I talk about riparian corridor.
Cool. Okay.
That can be, that can look like a lot of different things.
Yeah.
What you're trying to make it look like, but
yeah, that's why I think that it's, you know, what does it sound like? What does it smell like? What does it feel like? What does it taste like? Let's hope no one's tasting it. And look, you know, how does this whole thing, how does the water appeal to the senses? Because that's what people really remember. They'll remember what they saw, but they'll really remember what they felt. And you've got to appeal to multiple senses to do that, I think. So that's why several meetings ago when somebody said, what's this project about? It's about the water. But we got to go all in on the water and really optimize, if you will, the water.
Great answer.
And I think, Tim, one of the things that was brought up earlier, and I think it speaks to the project as a whole, right? Is the riparian vision is, you know, you can easily look at the Dogwood Canyon idea and say, are we trying to create that? And I think the comment earlier, and I'm definitely paraphrasing this because I didn't record it, but it's that it is an urbanized stream and it will always be an urbanized stream, correct? And so it doesn't fit the environment of a Dogwood Canyon, you know, to exactly to your point. I mean, and so with that in mind, what riparian means in this stretch is going to be different than even in the South Creek. I mean, that's an urban channel, but it's in a totally different setting. I mean, this could not become any more urbanized than it is. And we've got to fit within that element. So.
It definitely needs softened. It needs mediated. What we have now, it just needs mediated.
And that's the goal.
Yeah, but I love Sarah's line. It's things live there. I think that's great.
So let me ask you a designy question then. Is trying to meet the goal of things live there in conflict with this is an iconic place in our downtown. This is a very urban space, very urban place. And if the goal is to have things live there, those things need space and they need room so that their natural functions can happen. And there's not a lot of ground here. There's not a lot of space here. And so there is to me, there is an inherent conflict with that ideal versus the vision of creating this iconic back porch or backyard for downtown. There seems to be some conflict here that we're going to have to work our way through. I mean, we already sort of recognize that, but that may deepen it a little bit for me, because what we're left with to accomplish one goal is going to be a real challenge to accomplish for the other, I think.
I think that's why I get. Oh, sorry. I think that's why I get nervous when I hear about all the uses people want to incorporate into that area, because it's like, I know it is a small space and I know we need, and so when we were talking about the Meeks property the other day, I was thinking, why do we need to fill it up? You know, I was like, can we keep some green space there, you know? But anyway, I understand what you're saying. There's a lot of needs, a lot of desires for a very small space.
And I guess what I'm most fearful of here is half measures. So that you don't really accomplish either one. I think that's the failure of a lot of great ideas and only fair execution. So let's be honest and be mindful with each other about that as we work our way through these solutions.
I do want to share, like, I walk down in that tunnel a lot for various reasons, and there's always something down. Like, there's fish down there right now. Like, they are struggling, and they don't look great, but there's always life down there. So I don't necessarily think it's impossible to. I mean, we're going to be creating something that's 100 times better than what they're living in right now, and there's already life down there. So I think we'll be able to do it.
I've got a couple observations on that question, and I think it's it's maybe one of the key questions to the project of the product. It's a fantastic question. It's one that we need to be kind of keeping that top of mind for the next 3 weeks. But the habitat extends from Fort on the west to